So we've been doing a series. This is now part 6 of what looks like it'll probably be about an 8-part series by the time we're through with it. And we've been talking about the end times because that's just something that's really on people's minds. As you look at the news and as you watch TV, you just see a lot of things that people are saying, what in the world is going on in the world? And so this is part 6. And again, these messages have kind of built on one another. And so if you've missed a message, you can go to New Life Raymond on our website. They're all archived there. You can check them out and catch up with anything that you missed. And a lot of people are telling other people, and these messages are now literally going all around the country. And so it's kind of exciting. I wanted to just share a little bit something this week. What if somebody came up to you like 5 years ago and said, hey, in 2015, there was going to be a plane crash? And you'd say, well, yeah, all right, I'll wait until 2015 and see what happens. And then, in 2015, if there wasn't a plane crash, you'd say, well, that person was an idiot. And even if there was a plane crash, you'd say, well, you know what, good guess, right? I mean, what are the odds? But what if that person came up to you and said, hey, in 2015, there's going to be a train accident and a plane crash, and there's going to be an economic collapse, and there's going to be a hurricane, and a war is going to break out. Then after a while, you'd have to say, what are the odds of all of that happening, right? I mean, that starts getting into the, improbable odds. And so when you look at Scripture, when you look at God's Word about what's happening in the end times, there are so many prophecies that it's not even funny, that give us indications on how we know what day that we're living in. So I want to share with you really quickly some of these prophecies, and I'm putting them in the order that the greatest impact in my life. These are the things that I feel personally are the greatest impacts that let me know that as humanity on earth, that we are rapidly facing the end times. And the first one is the rebirth of the nation Israel. Remember I said that Israel is God's timepiece. Israel is God's people. He has always dealt with humanity through the nation of Israel. And so the rebirth of Israel as a nation, to me, is absolutely the most profound indicator of what's happened. So I want to look at this prophecy from Isaiah chapter 11. In verse 11, it says this: "Then it will happen on the day that the Lord will again recover." Now there's a clue. Again recover the second time with his hand the remnant of his people who will remain from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and from the islands of the seas. And then he goes on in verse 12 and he says this: "And he will lift up a standard for the nations and assemble the banished ones of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." Now this is so important because we know that when Isaiah was writing this prophecy, it was right on the edge of Israel being judged and taken into captivity by the superpower Babylon. And so it would have been something to say that, hey, Babylon is going to take you over, but God's going to bring you back. But he doesn't. Instead, he says a second time, God is going to bring you back. And he doesn't just say from Babylon, because when they went into captivity in Babylon, that's where they went, in Babylon. But instead, he says here from the four corners of the earth. And so we know that in 70 A.D., Titus, the Roman general, marched into Jerusalem, sacked the city, burned it with fire, murdered about 1 million Jews, and the remnant dispersed everywhere around the world, and they had been dispersed for about 2,000 years. So it would have been absolutely impossible for end times biblical prophecies to be fulfilled for like the last 2,000 years. It couldn't have happened in the 13th century or the 15th century or the 18th century. But it wasn't until about 100 years ago that it all began actually with the Balfour Declaration on November 2nd, 1917. That was at the end of World War I. And at the end of World War I, the Allies beat both the Germans and the Turks. And remember, last week I talked about Turkey, very powerful Islamic nation, very central to what goes on with caliphate and all that kind of stuff. And they had sided with the Germans. And so when the British government began to break up those two empires, they wanted to create a homeland for the Jewish people. Now remember, it wasn't until about 132 AD that the Romans called that region Palestine. It's always been Israel. And so Lord Balfour, the British Foreign Secretary, declared that it was the intention of the British government for the reestablishment of the home of the national Jewish people. Now, that wasn't fulfilled until after World War II on May 14, 1948. Israel was given back to the Jews. The Jews reoccupied that region. And then about 20 years after that, on June 7th, 1967, this is in my lifetime, during the Six-Day War, when like 8 Arab nations aligned themselves against Israel, and Israel soundly beat them, that they actually regained and reoccupied Jerusalem, which is their headquarters. And so this was something that happened within the last 100 years. So in 6,000 years, human history, the last 2,000 years, impossible for biblical prophecy to be fulfilled. In the last 100 years, Israel becomes a nation again, and all of a sudden we start seeing things happen. And I remember the Six-Day War. I was 9 years old, and I remember headlines in the papers about this thing called the Six-Day War. It didn't register a whole lot with me, but I do remember seeing these headlines. And then the prophet Zechariah had said this: it will come about in that day, I will make Jerusalem, and look how he he doesn't say Israel, but Jerusalem, a heavy stone for all the people, and those who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations and all the earth will gather against it. And so this is what we're beginning to see now. Israel always in the news, every week in the news. Right now there's big uprisings with the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Israel just this week called out their army to now start bordering their checkpoints and all this stuff. There's this rage of Islam against the nation of Israel. And so not only has this been fulfilled in the last 100 years, of the last 2,000 years, but now we're actually seeing it really escalate and become more and more of a focal point of what's going on in the world. So as far as I'm concerned, this has become the biggest indicator that we are in the end times, because Israel is back in her homeland. The second one is the fulfillment of Revelation 9:16. So when the Apostle John wrote this 2,000 years ago, he said the number of the armies of the horsemen who would be invading Israel was 200 million, and I heard the number of them. Again, for 2,000 years, that was impossible. As a matter of fact, when John wrote this, there was scarcely 200 million people on the planet. And it hasn't been until like the last 30 years that China can boast of fielding an army of over 200 million people. We also looked at that India can now boast of fielding an army of 200 million people. And in the case of caliphate, or the unification of the Islamic states, Islam also could easily put together an army of 200 million. Now, just stop and think about this. We're talking about an army alone of 200 million. The population of the United States is only about 350 million. So these are massive, these are mind-boggling numbers of these armies. This could not have happened in the last 2,000 years when these prophecies were written until just recently. Just like in our lifetime, this came about. And so that's why I think that is hugely significant and very powerful. The next one, or number 3, is the fulfillment of Revelation 13:16. Again, when John wrote this 2,000 years ago, he said this: he, the Antichrist, causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free men and slaves, to be given a mark on their right hands or their forehead. He goes on to say that they won't be able to buy or sell or do anything without this mark. And, for thousands of years, this was like an impossibility. There's no way, because of national borders and national defense, there was no way, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have these things to do this. But it's only in our lifetime that all of a sudden you have things like the RF chip, the radio frequency chip, that can literally be embedded in the skin. And I'm not saying that this is the mark of the beast, but I'm just saying that the technology is there, that every man, woman, and child on planet Earth could be tagged, could be identified, and could be followed. And I think it was last week that I mentioned that the nation of India, the nation of China, the European Union, and even the United States, through the Real ID Act of Homeland Security, have been moving to national identifications. China's done, India's done, European Union in process, United States in process. We mentioned that. Is this such a real thing that we just saw last week, that your New Hampshire driver's license will not allow you to fly airplanes starting in January? Because New Hampshire is a state that is non-compliant to the Real ID Act. And so you're going to have a second form of identification. because it's non-compliant. And so the possibilities, all I'm saying, I'm not saying that that's the mark of the beast. I'm just saying that the possibility through technology now is that for 2,000 years, again, these prophecies could not have been fulfilled. Impossible. But in our lifetime, we're seeing all of these things coming together all at once. The rebirth of the nation Israel, armies of 200 million, the ability through technology of tracking people and giving them national identifications or some form of identification. And again, I'm not saying that that's it, but I'm saying that the technology is here, that these things are happening. The next one, which I think, again, is really, really huge, is the fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12. Verse 4 says this, "But as for you, Daniel, conceal the words and seal up the book until the ends of time." So this is all dealing with prophecy. "Many will go back to and fro, and knowledge will increase." So what Daniel is saying is he's saying, look, I'm going to give you a little snapshot of the end times. In the end times, travel is going to be off the charts, and technology or knowledge will be off the charts. Come on. Seriously? In the last 6,000 years, for 6,000 years, people have gotten by on horse and buggy and sail ship. It hasn't been until like maybe the last 100, 120 years or so that the invention of the automobile and then the invention of all of these other things to where now in just this little short time of about 100 years, we've gone from flight to putting people on the moon to sending rocket ships past Pluto to all kinds of crazy things. So, this is so exciting. I want you to just check this out. So, do you think that prophecy of travel being increased and knowledge being increased has really exponentially jumped off the charts just within the last 100 years? And especially even just, now they're saying knowledge is doubling almost every 6 months, technology. It used to be, every 5 years, then every 2.5 years, then every year, and now it's just out of control, crazy what's going on. As a matter of fact, just some of the statistics I came across was that solar power that relies on nanotechnology will be cheap enough and powerful enough to power the entire world within 20 years. Neuroscience projects to reverse engineer the brain will construct a full synthetic model by 2029, giving us greater insight in how the brain thinks. In other words, they're going to actually create a synthetic brain. And who was it? Hawkins, the guy that's a total atheist, who said when we create artificial intelligence, that's the end of humanity on planet Earth. And this stuff is unwinding. Genetics, within 10 years, we will have a digital copy of our genome leading to medical therapies personalized to our individual genetic makeup. Isn't that something? I mean, you see these commercials, your arm hurt, take this pill, it'll hurt your arm. And then it says side effects is your hair will fall out, your eyesight will go bad, you'll bleed from the nose, you'll die from this and that, but your arm will feel great, And that's where we are. But what's going to happen when they can tailor-make prescribed things to you based on your genetic makeup? That's what they're working on. Nanotechnology, as robots get smaller and smaller, they will be able to insert them into your bodies to repair damages or aging tissue. They're doing that now. They're actually developing machines that are so small they can inject it in the bloodstream, and they go in and chip away and blow up blood clots or plaque buildup in the arteries and just give you like a Roto-Rooter thing, and you don't even have to go to the hospital. I mean, isn't that awesome? Or imagine ladies, no more Botox. You just take something, take a pill, those little things are released, and it's like you look 20 years younger. Well, isn't that something, And then somebody takes 10 of them and goes back to crying like a baby. Who knows? It's just going to be crazy. But it says knowledge will be increased. Do you think we live in a time? Listen, I got a smartphone. You got smartphones. You can ask. You can Google, and you can ask. You can say, what was Napoleon's strategy in the Battle of Waterloo? Like crazy, and it'll just come right up on your smartphone. You can ask it anything. Knowledge is right there at our fingertips. And so this is what Daniel said. Travel. You can go anywhere on the planet in a matter of hours. So you don't understand, like about 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, it would take you like 2.5 months to go back to Europe by ship. Now you can be there like in 7 hours. And that's just like on a regular plane, probably faster on a supersonic. It's just crazy what's going on. As a matter of fact, I saw an article, I was going to try to load it and we had some trouble with it, but it was saying that the new warfare of the 21st century is not nuclear war, it is stockpiling computer code. There are countries that are hacking other countries' computer systems, and the big countries like Russia, China, United States, they're hacking into other nations' systems, and they're getting information and backing out and covering their tracks so nobody ever knows they're there. Then they're selling that information to third world countries. So third world countries could have the capability of shutting down our water, shutting down our power, shutting down. I mean, this is the new cyber terrorism thing that we're dealing with now. And that's why just in the military alone, they've just hired like a whole new fleet of people that all they do is computer hacking and solving computer issues. So Daniel, this is the fourth one of prophecies that are just dealing what's going on in the time that we live now. It's incredible. So the number 4 is the instability of nature. We see the instability of nature. Luke 21 says this, there will be great earthquakes in various places, plagues, famines, there will be terror and great signs from heaven. So we see all of this happening. As a matter of fact, this is a graph of earthquake activity in the world. So here is 2007, just a few years ago, and you can see how exponentially it has climbed until 2011. We had like this spike of earthquake activity, and then it's still going up. This chart was done in 2012, so we don't even have it. But if you look at some of these charts online, you will see where seismic activity is like insane what's going on in our world right now. Now, they say it's because of fracking. They say it's because of all the oil being pulled out of the earth that, things are happening, places are shifting. But the thing is it's happening. It's happening in our lifetime. This is central United States. This is just a central United States from 1975, and then here we are when we hit 2000, let's say around 2010, 11, 12, and then right into 2015. Look at that increase just right here in the breadbasket. Look at that. What's that, Oklahoma? No longer proud to be an Okie from Muskogee or whatever. I mean, it's crazy what's happened in this country. That's not to talk about droughts, right? California, huge drought. Floods, crazy floods. I don't know, just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the floods in Portland. Did you see that? I mean, cars right up to their windshields, and hurricanes, all of these things that are increasing, tsunamis. You see more and more and more. on the news of what's going on. Guess what? All prophesied, all talked about. Another one, and I'm just going to start moving through these fast because they just build on one another, is the increase of lawlessness and violence. Matthew 24, verse 12, Jesus said, because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. And so in our lifetime, we're seeing like this incredible rise of lawlessness. In Baltimore alone, 43 homicides just till May. Up till right now, it's been the deadliest year since 1972, over 119 murders in Baltimore alone. You know, we talk about our veterans, we talk about our military people, and we say, oh, casualties in Afghanistan, casualties in Iraq. Listen, we're dying faster in our inner cities than in any conflict that we're in. It's just amazing what's going on. In Houston, murder has gone up 45% since last year at this time. I don't know if you watch the news, but in New York City alone, within the last week and a half, 3 moms have thrown their babies off of skyscrapers. Have you been watching that? Moms just chucking their kids out of windows, like eight floors up. It's just, they're like perplexed, like, why is this happening? The latest statistic in Milwaukee shows a 103 spike in murders compared to a year ago. Atlanta, 41 people were killed, just absolutely an increase of 52%. And this doesn't take into account the riot mentality that people have nowadays. I mean, whether it's somebody wins at a sports game, there's a big riot and there's looting, or, all these things, hatred towards police, which that wasn't around even just 2 years ago. And now there's such hatred against police and brutal murders of our police. Gang violence is up. Domestic murders up. Random shootings up. And not to mention rape, theft, arson, assault. All of these things are up. As a matter of fact, concealed carry permits have skyrocketed to where we're like the Wild West. More people carrying. And I'm telling you, you just have to do that, because that's how crazy it is. And I firmly believe the best solution to stop a crazy person with a gun is to have a sane person with a gun. I do. I believe in the Second Amendment. That's just my personal. I'm not saying thus saith the Lord, but I say that that's a good thing to have. So again, all of these things just culminating in our lifetime, right? The next thing is an increasing immorality. Jesus said in Matthew 24:37, the coming of the Son of Man will be just like in the days of Noah. And when we read the story of the flood in the days of Noah, it was immoral, it was vulgar, it was crazy what was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. And we get the name sodomy from Sodom because of the homosexual activity that was happening there. So when I look at immorality, I've only got 2 words. Miley Cyrus, right? I mean, come on, how do you go from Disney to disgusting so fast, right? Just this week she announced that she's launching a all-nude concert. It's in the news. I'm not making this stuff up. It's incredible. I mean, the day of actually consummating your marriage on your honeymoon is as rare as finding an Obama sticker next to an NRA sticker on a bumper, right? It just doesn't happen. And it's just crazy. Cut it out, Brian. United States is the largest distributor of pornography. We had the whole 50 Shades of Grey thing, and yet more people are unhappy as ever before. Isn't it amazing? More people are unhappy. And again, I don't know if you saw this on the news, but just this week, this is like the greatest series to preach because it's like every week. Just this week, archaeologists said they discovered the ancient city of Sodom. And lo and behold, they said it came to an abrupt end, and they don't know why. It's like, well, read the Bible. It's right there. What happened? Going on, number 7 is the increase of materialism. Timothy writes, or Paul writes this in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 4, actually. He says, but realize this in the last days. So here he's telling us, in the last days, difficult times are going to come. Men will be lovers of self. You don't believe it? Go to Facebook. Lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, reviler, disobedience of parents, and that's the parents' fault. That's the parents' fault if they're disobedient. Ungrateful, unholy. He goes on. Unloving, irreconcilable. We see so many irreconciliations in divorce, in the workplace, in the church, everywhere. Everybody's offended of everything. As a matter of fact, I saw something somewhere and it said 2015, the year that America got offended over everything. Isn't that right? Like everybody's offended over something. Malicious gossips without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Never before have we seen such hedonism which is the love of pleasure. It's all about me, and I want to be happy. And our forefathers didn't have that. Our forefathers looked out for neighbors. Our forefathers sacrificed for the next generation. But we live in a time where it's all about me. I'm going to live fast, furious. I want to do everything I can do. Hedonism and humanism combined. We love our stuff. We love our stuff, says the guy with 3 motorcycles, right? I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, I put myself right in there. I'm not, high and mighty. It's just, and so it's, you take one of these and it's like, but you start stacking these things up and it's too much information to turn a blind eye to. All of these things that are happening in our lifetime. And then it talks about an increase of drugs. The use of drugs is heroin is an epidemic right now. 300 deaths in New Hampshire alone so far with heroin overdoses. And so we have a heroin epidemic going crazy right now. The legalization of marijuana, big, political talking point. Colorado passed it. All you have to do is go to Colorado and talk to them about, hey, how's that working for you? Homelessness off the charts. People living in the streets off the charts. Productivity in the belly, so much so that factories and businesses are starting to move out of Colorado because they're like the workers they're stoned all the time. And so they're not doing a good job. Over-the-counter prescriptions that are falling into the wrong hands. Mood-altering drugs. I'm unhappy. Take Prozac. I'm this. I'm that. Take this. Everybody's taking... And it's just crazy what's going on with the use of drugs. Worldwide alcoholism, too. I just saw an article the other day saying alcoholism in Russia, again, is going crazy off the charts. Here in New Hampshire, between 12 and 20 years old, here in New Hampshire, okay, 12 and 20 in New Hampshire, we're number 1 in teen binge drinking. We're number 1 in alcohol consumption. We're number 1 in illegal drug usage, and we're number 1 in over-the-counter drugs being used by that age group, 12 through 20. In New Hampshire, we're number 1 in all of those. So this craziness about this increase of drugs. And you know what? Back after 9/11, David Wilkerson, who was a pastor in Texas and the starter of Teen Challenge, David Wilkerson said that after 9/11, people turned to the church. If you remember, people flocked to churches. And he said, and they didn't find what they were looking for, and now they're turning to anything and everything they can get their hands on. Gambling, sex, alcoholism, drugs, anything they can get their hands on. Why? Well, that leads us to the next point, which is the increase of apostasy in the church. This is what Paul said in Timothy. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. Wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires. They will turn away from the truth and will turn aside to myths. And so this is what he's saying. He's saying there's going to be all these rainbow churches that, we love we love everyone too. But there's still wrong is wrong and right is right. And so all these things, and abortion is a woman's right rather than, I think abortion is murder. And so there's this vacillation and this difference. All you need is love. If you love it, doesn't matter what goes on, which is ludicrous. And so now we have all of this sexual reorientation and this craziness in our country where, it's great to get in these debates with these people because, transgender is okay and bisexual okay and homosexual is really? Well, where do you draw the line on that? Is it okay for a 55-year-old guy to be in love with a 6-year-old? Because it's love after all, right? Is it okay for a woman to marry her dog if she really, 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 really loves it? You see, where do you start stopping that slippery slope and that slide when you get away from what God says? In churches, by the hundreds, by the thousands, are getting away from teaching this book, from teaching what the Scriptures say. They're not teaching that, hey, you know what? You have to be born again. You have to receive this great sacrifice of the love of God demonstrated of Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross, His innocent life for your guilty sin. He died for you. They're not teaching that. Instead, they deny the Bible. They deny that Jesus was God. They deny the virgin birth. They deny the resurrection. They deny the miracles. And I'm like, well, what's left? What are you preaching, the maps? I mean, seriously, at that point, what's left in your book? And yet this is what's happening. Another point is the rise of occultism and paganism. Everywhere in our nation, Wicca and witches and demonology, big thing with young kids, and there's a rise of that. All you have to do is wait for the next full moon and go down to one of the beaches, Hampton Beach, and you'll see them out there. All the witches and Wiccas, they come out there, they draw their circles on the sand like their little lanterns, and they do their thing. It's just really happening more and more in the world in which we live in. Another one is the persecution of Christians. Man, what ISIS is doing around the world, brutal beheadings, lighting people on fire, this incredible treatment, and our nation is absolutely silent. You don't hear anything on the news medias about the atrocities that are happening to Christians. If it was happening to any other demographic, there'd be a huge outcry. But it's unbelievable how many people are being persecuted. Another one is the proliferation of false Christs. You have them popping up all over the place. And a false Christ really is anything that shows a different way of salvation. So even New Age, even Scientology, all these Hollywood things teaching a different way. Another one that Jesus said would happen is signs in the heavens. He said there will be great signs from the heavens. Have we ever seen so many things? Just this week, again, it's like, this is so great. Just this week, they showed pictures. The Hubble telescope captured pictures of a barrel galaxy 70 million light years away. That is beyond your human brain to even try to calculate. What is it? Light goes around this planet like 5 times in 1 second, or some crazy thing like that. In 1 second, it goes around this planet 5 times. Think how far it travels in a minute. Think how far in an hour. Think how far in a year. And then you talk about 70 billion of those years at light speed, and they've discovered a galaxy out there. We've never seen so many signs. Blood moons, eclipses, the discovery of water on Mars, ice on Pluto's moon. No wonder he howls. I mean, it's crazy. There's stuff happening like... All right, there was no way to get around that one without passing that one up. But literally, they discovered ice on water's moon. Just this week again, they discovered a flickering star in some galaxy that they're now saying it's a sign of life. If you've seen that in the news, if you follow that, you got to check things out. It's just incredible what's happening. And all of these signs are rolling on like crazy. Also, Jesus said this in Matthew 24, verse 6. You'll be hearing of wars, rumors of wars. See that you're not frightened, for these things must take place. It's not yet the end. Are you kidding me? Look what's happening in our world right now. How do I say this without getting in trouble? Well, I probably can't. So you have an administration right now that is spineless and has created this vacuum to where now we see the horizons of ISIS. Now we see Russia in Syria bombing the people that we train to be rebels, that we supply to be rebels. Now we see China getting involved in the game. And now we see this week Cuba siding with Russia over Syria. Now, wait a minute. Wasn't Cuba the one that we just signed a new deal with saying, hey, they're buddies now. They're our pals now. And what are they doing? They're siding with Russia over there in Syria. It's absolutely crazy. We still have a war going on in Afghanistan. We still have a war going on in the Ukraine. We still have the biggest war of all, which is terrorism, which keeps everybody on edge. Look how our lifestyles have changed and will continue to change over the threat of terrorism. Absolutely insane what's going on. You have weapons of mass destruction. We talk about nuclear, but that's only a part of it. There's biological, there's EMPs that knock out power grids, which Korea, by the way, is practicing launching off of oil tankers. Just civilian oil tankers being able to launch EMPs off of that. It's just crazy what's going on in the world. Just this week again. Are you getting tired of hearing me say just this week? Just this week, Iran released pictures of underground bunkers. And when I'm talking underground, I'm talking 500 feet underground of huge missile silos carrying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of long-range and short-range missile capacities. And they say that was one of 100 such sites in Iran. Absolutely incredible what's going on. As a matter of fact, last week, in one of our services, second service I think it was, there was a gentleman that was visiting who was a retired colonel in the Air Force, and he dealt a lot with like security and that kind of stuff. And he got me out in the foyer and he says, have you been reviewing the briefs that I've written? Because I was talking about Turkey and I was talking about ISIS and I was talking about what was going on in the Islamic states. See, they know this stuff. They know what's going on. talking about an increase in famine. Jesus said this, there will be great earthquakes, various places, and plagues and famines. Talking about famines. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that about 805 million people, that's about 1 in 9, suffer from chronic undernourishment in our world today. Mostly from developing nations. Mostly from refugees being in war-torn areas or natural disasters or things like that. But think about that. 1 in 9 people in the world are hungry. They go without food. They go malnourished. And so this was a sign that Jesus said, hey, look out for. It's happening. Also, an increase of pestilence. I mean, my goodness, there's new superbugs that are coming out that are resistant to any kind of antibiotic. There's AIDS, there's influenza, there's malaria, there's Ebola, there's cholera, there's smallpox. Is it okay if I sneeze now? Scientists, I read just a little while ago, scientists want to reawaken a strain of bubonic plague that they discovered. Did you read that? Did you see that in the news? Oh, I think that's a great idea. You know, don't wait, let's do it now. Reawaken the bubonic plague? Like, are you insane? Are you crazy? Just this past week, there I go again, some scientists in Russia discovered some germ that lives under the permafrost, and wherever this germ is, things live longer and longer and longer, so he injected himself with this germ. It's like, I wished I was. I mean, it's like this guy, you know, who knows? That could be like the zombie apocalypse right there, right? I mean, it's insane what happened. These people, and so you look at what's going on and you start putting these things together and you say, you know what, there's just too much happening in our lifetime to say it's just a fluke or, you know, it's just the way the world's going. Yeah, it is the way it's world going, but it's what Jesus talked about before the end of this age. And remember, we said that the end of the age is not the end of the world. It's the end of the age. It's the end of human government, and we're getting ready for the introduction of God's government in the world. You have the unification of the world, the UN, the EU, the One World Bank, the One World Health Organization, the One World Economy, all of these different things, global governments, all this different thing being pushed like never before. You have the rise of Eastern military power. Again, we talked about that last week, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Islam. However, just this week, I saw that Florida airports have now built in and designed special prayer rooms for Muslims to spread their prayer rugs and pray in airports in the United States because we don't want to offend them. We can rip out the 10 Commandments, we can tear down crosses, we can take out scriptures everywhere and anywhere, but we don't want to offend them. And there's a good reason, because you can insult a Christian and they'll say, but when you insult Islam, they're coming at you with an AK-47, right? So people are like, oh, you know, let's not. So now we're installing special prayer rooms for them in our airports. It's absolutely ludicrous what's going on, and yet this is exactly the world we live in. Also talk about the denial of creation by God. I mean, if you're a creationist, you're looked at like a weirdo. If you're an evolutionist, you have the truth. And whatever happened to theories, by the way, because really nobody was there back then. And by the way, there's definitely a lot more proof for creation than not. But I said all of that to get to this point. You feeling good? You're like, ooh, I'm so glad I went to church today. Ooh. One of the greatest signs, Joel chapter 2 and numerous other scriptures, is the outpouring of God's Spirit in the end days. That God said, I will pour out my Spirit. Missiologists, people who study missions, say that right now, today, there are about an average of 20,000 Chinese people coming to faith in Christ a day. A day. It's massive what's happening. In India, the home church movement is exploding. Home churches everywhere and people coming to Christ. Even in the Islamic world, you'll never hear about it because it's so unrecorded and so secretive. People are coming to Christ. In South America, just a couple years ago, we had what was referred to as the Argentinian revival, which was followed by signs and wonders and thousands of people coming to Christ. One of our missionaries that we support, that's recorded back there on our missions wall, missionary Mike Chase, missionary to China, just sent me an email a couple of weeks ago saying that they just finished distributing 38,000 copies of the Book of Hope in their schools. Imagine that. Do you think we could distribute 38,000 copies of a religious document in our schools? Yeah, it ain't going to happen, is it? But over in the Philippines, they've opened their doors wide and they're welcoming this. And then also, this last one is Jesus said in Matthew 24, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. And again, this is something that's being fulfilled in our lifetime. It's never happened before. In the early 1900s, missionaries started going out like never before. There was a huge movement and revival. Actually, Assemblies of God was cutting edge and sending missionaries all around the world. The Bible is being translated into almost every dialect on planet Earth. And so this scripture that Jesus said would happen before the end is another one that is literally being fulfilled in our lifetime. So you have all of these things that for thousands of years could not have possibly happened, and all of a sudden in our lifetime we're seeing bang, 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 bang. They're all coming together at an incredible speed. But this outpouring of the gospel, do you know that today in Seoul, Korea, there's a church, one church, Yodia Full Gospel Church. They have a small Sunday attendance of 480,000. How'd you like to be an usher in that service? 480,000 people attend that church. Deeper Life Ministry in Africa, 75,000 people. Jesus Celebration in Africa, 60,000 people. 3 more churches in Africa at 50,000 apiece. And I'm going to show you why in just a minute. Lakeland Church here in Houston, Texas, 43,000 people. Second Baptist Church, 24,000 people. North Point Baptist Church in Georgia, 22,000 people in attendance. That's like incredible. But most of all the churches are under 100. Just every street corner, churches here, there, and mostly they're small. But it just makes up a big population of people. And so I wanted to end on a positive note, and I wanted to end on, what's happening, because people can hear about end times, and quite frankly, it can scare you, and quite frankly, I would love for it to scare the hell out of you. Like literally, like just scare, so that you would say, wow, is this real? Is this true? You don't have to believe me. Go to the scriptures. Go, find the knowledge, find the information that's out there. This stuff is happening at breakneck speed. But I wanted to show you that God isn't just sleeping through all of this. That things are happening and people are coming to Christ in record numbers. I want to close with a little video clip of a modern-day apostle. He is a missionary to Africa. His name is Reinhard Bonnke. And you're going to see some clips of crusades that he holds, and they're going to show you numbers. Those numbers are not the numbers of the people in attendance. They're the numbers of the people that gave their hearts to Christ during the crusade. Because I want you to leave on a powerful note, and I want you to leave on a realization that God is moving like never before in the world, because heaven's doors are open wide, because Jesus died for whosoever will, except the gift of his Son, will inherit eternal life. And so I'm not going to have a formal closing. I'm going to show this clip, and when it's done, you can just get up and go to a cafe and enjoy some refreshments.